I'm only 14 years old and my parents are forcing me into hard labor. I don't want to do it. I want to go to school and get an education. So now they're kicking me out because I refused to do the work on the farm after I passed out. Luckily, my uncle has this to say.
I feel like the most unfortunate 14-year-old in the world. I'm in the countryside of Arkansas where everybody's predominantly a farmer. Children are made to start early on the farm, and only a few parents who grasp the importance of education even bother to send their kids to school. I'm not lucky to have such parents. My father does not have land of his own, but he always buys the produce of different farmers and sells them in the market. I have a younger brother and 10 years called Toby. I was a high school junior when I turned 14, and though I did not fully understand how important education was, I knew I wanted to be something more than a farmer. But my father dashed my hopes to pieces days after my 14th birthday. My father, he called me into his room and told me the time had come for me to quit my education. He said that the arrangements had been made with a friend who owned a large expanse of farmland, and I was going to be one of the hired laborers. I was 14 and skinny, and I did not have the kind of physical endurance that my peers had. I didn't know if I would say it. It was because my brother and I weren't properly fed by our parents. I felt bad about the arrangement, but I was in absolutely no position to air my opinion or challenge that of my parents, and that was how I kissed my education goodbye. I passed out on all the farms on my first day of work due to exhaustion. I could not fully describe the kind of commotion that happened. After I revived, the farm owner himself took me back home to meet my parents. He told my parents what happened, but my parents were more concerned about me resuming to work as soon as I possibly could. My father told his friend not to worry as I would resume work the next day, after I must have taken that day's rest. I was pained by my father's comments, but his friend's response was comforting. His friend told my parents that he was no longer willing to let me work on his farm, as he did not think that I was fit. My father tried to convince him, but he said he did not want to get into any kind of trouble. He left the house, and my parents were angry at me for the couple of days that followed. My younger brother watched in terror because he knew that it was the same fate that awaited him in 4 years, if not less. My father tried to get other employees to take me in, but the news about how I had collapsed on the farm traveled around the community, so it was very difficult for him to convince somebody to hire me. My presence at the house, it began to irritate my parents. I'd never seemed to do anything right in their eyes. They shortened the ration of meals that I ate and still complained that I ate too much. If something was out of place, no other person was held responsible. With the way they came at me, it was surprising that they did not complain that I was sucking up too much oxygen in the atmosphere. After my father had failed in getting another work, I thought it would be a nice idea to go back to school instead of staying at home and doing nothing. So I approached my parents one evening and made the suggestion, but it was a very, very bad idea. I got into my parents' room that day and their faces contorted to indicate their disgust at my presence. I told them that I need to speak with them about something very important. My father asked me to hurry up with whatever I wanted to say. I began to tell him how I felt that going to school was a better way to spend my time, as I could not just sit idly at home doing nothing. My mother got up from the bed and walked past me like she was going to use the bathroom, while I continued to talk. I immediately heard a loud bang and I saw stars. My mother had given me a thunderous clap, a slap from behind, and I staggered a bit as she threatened to deal with me if I did not shut up. She said I'm too weak to work, too weak to contribute to the family, but when it came to school, my strength was over the roof. She turned to my father and said her suspicion all along was correct. My mom told my dad that I had made up the fainting drama just to make sure that I was never sent back to the farm to work. My father then gave me an ultimatum to go out each day till I found somebody willing to hire me for labor, otherwise he would kick me out of the house if there was no result after a week. There was no result after a week, and my father fulfilled his promise to throw me out. They initially ignored me after I told them that I could get no job, but I never knew that they were already plotting my exit. I was surprised when I saw CPS in our home. My parents had noted that they could no longer care for me, so I wanted them to move me to a foster care or an orphanage. The Child Protective Services were at our home to ascertain if what my parents claimed was true, or if it was just a case of irresponsible parents trying to evade their responsibilities. I listened as my parents spoke about business, being very bad and finding it difficult to feed my younger brother and me. They said that at that point, they could only care for one of us, and after the agents from CPS listened to them, they noted that before sending me to a foster home or orphanage, they would need to check if there was any living relatives of my parents who would be willing to take me in, and only after then would they settle with other options of orphanage or foster home. My father immediately said that the only living relative he had was his cousin Uncle Jeff, who lived in the city and they had not seen him in a long time, so he was not sure he was capable of taking me in. My father claimed that Uncle Jeff was struggling as the last time he had heard about him. And do you know how long it's been? 7 years. Yes, 7 years. My father has not been in touch with the only living relative he has for 7 years, and he was using the information he had from several years ago to conclude what he felt would be the outcome if CPS approached him and asked if he could take me in. The truth of the matter is that there's a great possibility that Uncle Jeff might be financially able to take me in, but I'm not sure he would be willing, and this is something my parents know very well. Uncle Jeff used to live with us years back. He'd gone through college against the advice of my father, who up until now still sees academics as a waste of time and resources. I can vividly remember various times when my father would almost fall out with him because he felt Uncle Jeff was just using education as an excuse to be lazy and not join his mates on the farm. Well, Uncle Jeff graduated from college and would have gone for his master's degree, but there was no money, so he decided it's time to get a job. There was none. He did his best, but was just unfortunate, and my father began to get irritated. It got to a point where my dad could no longer bottle down his anger, so he called Uncle Jeff one day and asked him to leave his house because he could not keep feeding him. Uncle Jeff tried to explain to my father that he was doing his best to secure a job, but my father pinned his predicament on him. My father blamed him for, quote, wasting his time and little resources on school. Uncle Jeff was forced to leave the house that day, but rather than remain in the countryside, he permanently relocated to the city. Now, here's my question. If you were Uncle Jeff and you had made money, would you be willing to take in the son of your cousin who threw you out of his house and never called you all these years to check up on you? The CPS has promised that they would reach out to my uncle and see what his response would be. I feel uneasy because I believe my uncle would not want to take me in, and I could just land up in a foster home. I guess I would find out my fate in just a few days. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So today's story is completely different than we're used to. The first update came out way longer than OP initiated. Guys, OP is now 19 years old here, and this is coming out years later. We're no longer looking at a 14-year-old, it's a fully grown adult. Here's OP back 5 years later with update number 1, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's been years since I promised that I was going to keep you guys updated. I apologize. A lot has just been going through my life. The CPS got back to my parents and let them know that my uncle had decided to take me. My parents were as surprised as I was because they felt Uncle Jeff would reward their act of wickedness with unkindness. They were rather happy that I was going to be taken out of their hands. As we were waiting for the appointment day, when I would be taken away from home to go live with my uncle, my parents repeatedly told me that since I've decided to tread the path of Uncle Jeff, I would end up like him, a never-do-well. The words of my parents had a strong negative impact on me till I went to Uncle Jeff's place. I remember the day when I was taken away by CPS. The only person who was emotional about my departure was my little brother Toby. He ran after me as I was being led away and held on to me tightly and began crying while saying that he did not want me to go. I can't describe what kind of pain I felt there. I immediately joined my brother to cry. My parents wasted no time in coming to separate us. They did not shout at my brother for trying to stall my departure, as the CPS would get a hint of the kind of parents they were. They told Toby and me that my departure was for the best, but one thing I was for certain of. Toby was going to have an encounter with my father's belt that day. I was nervous as we drove to my uncle's place. We got there, and my uncle seemed very elated to see me after so many years. I was not moved by a show of care and excitement because I felt all of that was make-believe, to have CPS believe that he had my best interest at heart. After about 5 minutes of discussing with my uncle, the Child Protection Services left me with him, and I braced up for the worst, but it never came. Uncle Jeff exclaimed that I was all skin and bones, and after he showed me to my room, he quickly began to fix me something to eat. The quality of the meal was, something I've never eaten in my life. If that were what my parents called a failure in life, then I would love to turn out to be a failure too. I cleared my plates within 5 minutes, and without asking if I was satisfied, my uncle dished out some more. I was allowed to take a long nap that afternoon before my uncle and I had a lengthy discussion. My uncle shook his head in disappointment as I explained to him what had truly happened. He said that if it were up to my parents, they would throw me out without getting the CPS involved. But it would have been seen as abandonment, and they could be arrested, and that was why they involved CPS. Uncle Jeff immediately put me back to school. He did not have a child as of his own, and a series of heartbreaks had taken his mind off marriage. He said he would consider getting a surrogate in the future, but he was focused on building his wealth at the time. 2 years went by, and my parents had not checked up on me to know how I was doing. I did not expect them to, but their wickedness had gotten to my uncle, and he decided to confront them. Uncle Jeff took me with him that day, and his car had broken down, so we took a taxi. We got to my parents' home, and everyone, my parents and Toby, was around. Toby was the one who opened the door to usher us into the parlor where my parents were seated. The moment I saw Toby, I realized how good and gracious Uncle Jeff had been to me. I'd grown from skin to bones to somebody who was well-fed, but that was not the same for my brother. Toby was excited to see me, but he did not express it for fear of my parents. He just stood at the door and smiled at us till my father asked who it was that had come to visit. Toby said nothing. He just stepped aside for me and my uncle to go in. My mother was the first person to speak, and both the tone and words that came out of her mouth were full of sarcasm and mockery. She asked if my uncle was already tired, and by that she meant tired of me. Well, that question cut me like a knife. It was more like I was some baggage to anybody who came around me. Thankfully, though, Uncle Jeff wasted no time in blasting them. He told my parents that he had brought me so they could see how much better I was doing after they abandoned me. This, according to my uncle, was proof of their failure. My father said that the only thing they could see was that I was sucking up all of Uncle Jeff's resources, and that was the only reason why I was so robust. And they asked him to take me and leave the house now if he had nothing else important to say. Uncle Jeff called them shameless and beckoned on me so we could take our leave. We were going, but my heart was bleeding and my legs were heavy. While all this drama was going on, my brother Toby, he did not even say a word, and I knew it was because our parents had already painted me bad and cautioned that he should keep his distance. Well, I'm currently 19 and in college, but I'm seriously worried about my younger brother Toby because I know that he cannot get the best in life while staying with my parents. Update number 2. Hey guys, it's been 3 weeks since my parents and Uncle Jeff met, and I visited them again just yesterday, and guys, I was not really myself after my uncle and I came back from my parents' home, and this was something Uncle Jeff could easily detect. I quickly opened up to him the moment he asked what the issue was. I told my uncle that my parents were the cause of my moodiness. Toby had aspirations that he could not achieve, and while living with my parents because they would require that he goes to school, and my parents were not fans of that. Secondly, the relationship between my only brother and me now seemed distant, and this was not what I wanted. Uncle Jeff said my brother's situation was pitiable, but nothing could be done as he lived with our parents, and if the problem was that Toby lived with our parents, I reasoned that the solution would simply be we go and get him. It felt that we needed to do it and go ask my parents. Since they had just willingly given me up, then they would probably jump at the thought of having somebody else take responsibility of Toby also. Uncle Jeff knew where I was heading, and Before I could even make the suggestion, he told me that the reason he had said it was pitiable was not because he could not or was not willing to take in my brother, but because my parents would not be willing to give him up. I still insisted that we tried, and he noted I could try, but he was done relating with my parents. So I visited my parents yesterday, and as expected, they were not glad to see me. My mother was not around this time, but my father was, so it was just me, him, and brother. I began to tell my father that I've come because I want to have Toby move to the city where we stayed so he could go to school and all. My father kept quiet for about 2 minutes after I was done, before asking if I felt that he did not have the interest of his son Toby at heart. The answer to that question was very obvious, but I did not want to evoke any form of drama, so I just replied by saying that I was only considering what Toby wanted for himself. My father immediately snapped. He said what he wanted for Toby was more important than what Toby wanted for himself. No, that's what I call entitlement. He did not even care that Toby was standing right there. Toby's 15, and just as he had done with me, my father had already taken him out of school and started pushing him towards a path that he did not want to follow. I don't know where the boldness came from, but I'm grateful it came. I told my father that forcing Toby to a path he did not choose for himself would only make him harbor resentment towards them in the future, but my father said the contrary would be the case because Toby would be grateful that he had listened to him. Toby, at that point, was audibly sobbing, and my father asked me to leave. He warned me to never show up at his house again, and I stood up and left. Uncle Jeff was right, after all. I'm not going to give up and let my parents successfully ruin the life of my brother with their entitlement. Toby's 15, which means that in 3 years he'll have reached the legal age where he can make decisions for himself. No longer be answerable to the parents. I just hope that when the time comes he still have the desire for school, and not have caved into the thwarted ideology of my parents. Update number 3. OP is 21 years old. I know what most people would call a big boy when they judge from a financial standpoint, but my heart is currently heavy even as I type this. I know, you might be wondering how I did it, especially since it's just been 2 years since my previous update. Well, 2 years, that's enough time for situations to turn around for an individual, is it not? Well, I'm just kidding though. The fact that I'm now worth over a little north of $500,000 is no effort of mine. My uncle and I lived quietly after I have concluded that I did not have parents. But I began to notice something with Uncle Jeff. His health was declining. I was concerned about it, so I asked him, but he said there was nothing to worry about. I found solace in his words of encouragement till one time he called me and initiated a discussion about how to always find strength in life even when one feels alone. It seemed awkward, but I tried to not read much between it. Uncle Jeff asked what I would do if I had all the wealth that he had amassed to myself, and I began to talk about how I would open up a scholarship fund for children in my countryside who, like me, desired to go to school but did not have parents wealthy enough to send them there. I was still talking when my uncle began to cough. I sympathized with him, but immediately ran to get him a glass of water the moment I saw that the cough was insistent. I was back with the glass of water in no time as he stretched out his hand to collect it, and as he did, I discovered it was covered in blood. This was more serious than I could have thought. After the situation seemed under control, I encouraged my uncle that we would go to the hospital right away, but he was rather calm about the whole thing. That's when he told me that he has stage 4 lung cancer. According to him, he's been undergoing some treatment before then, but the thing only grew worse. It felt really bad, but the greater blow came when he told me that the doctors have given him just a few months to live. I don't know what to do. I could give whatever was demanded of me than just to save my uncle's life. I could not bear the thought of him dying, so I began to suggest that he tried other well-known medical centers around the world. But he told me that he began to be quite a number of them, and they all had the same diagnosis. I lived in torment every single day from then on, because each day was a reminder that I limited time to spend with somebody who meant the world to me. As the days rolled by, my uncle had to be admitted to the hospital, where he began to put his things in order. I informed Uncle Jeff about my desire to call my parents and let them know of development, but he asked me not to do it. He said that they had turned their backs on him all his life, and so he did not need them as his life was drawing to its end. Uncle Jeff then informed me that I was going to be the sole owner of everything. I thought it was just a beautiful house that he had built and a modest amount of money in his account, but I was so mistaken. Uncle Jeff said he was well worth over $500,000, and it would all be mine. It did not matter, though. It was too heartbroken. I didn't care. I disobeyed what you would call my uncle's dying wish by reaching out to my parents. I just had to. I know how rocky things are between us, but I was willing to overlook the hurt that my parents caused me over the years so that my father could make up for his only living relationship who was about to die. My father, his line was not going through, so I called my mom. The moment she heard my voice, well, she hissed and passed the phone to father. My father responded with a yup, and it meant that I had a few seconds to state my reason for calling, and I then told my father that Uncle Jeff was seriously ill and admitted to the hospital. I was still talking, and about to get to the point where Uncle Jeff only had a few weeks left to live, but my father blew hot over the phone. He said that after my uncle and I had disrespected him, I was now calling him to solicit money for treatment. That was not even the painful part. The painful part was when my father now said that even if Uncle Jeff and I were both dying, and we would not be getting a dime of his hard-earned money, would be not coming our way. This man was heartless. This man was ruthless. I would not have been so mad if I had just listened to Uncle Jeff and not reached out. I'd have taken the route of peace, as I called my parents, but their show of selfishness was too much to stomach, so I terminated the phone call. Uncle Jeff passed away this week. And though we had talked a lot about me being strong when he died, something inevitable, it just turns out that you can't be prepared for such an event. Update number 4. Subscribe to the channel. Hey guys, I've disobeyed my uncle's dying wish of not informing my parents about his ailment, so I decided not to let my parents know that he was dead. After all, my father had pointed out that he cared less if either me or my uncle was dead. I'd never organized a party in my life, let alone a funeral, so I did not have any idea where to start. Thankfully, though, things just seemed to flow without stress in the moment. I informed his close friends about his demise. They take it upon themselves to make sure my uncle was given a befitting burial. The funeral day arrived, and it was a pity I had no family members around to give me the kind of emotional support that I needed. Uncle Jeff has not just been an uncle to me. He was as a father that my father refused to be. The mother that my mother refused to be, and more. Uncle Jeff was not a religious person, so the ceremony did not take place in a church, but in a funeral home where he listed a wish of being cremated, only to take place afterward. It was time to pay our last respects, and I was the first. Watching Uncle Jeff lying in the coffin like he was just having a peaceful sleep seemed like a bad dream that I would pay for anything just to wake up from. It took the strength that I did not have for me to not break down and cry like a child. I found a corner where I stood myself. Just letting my thoughts wander, I was immediately jolted back to reality when I heard someone say, "He was a good soul." The voice sounded very familiar, like that of my father. I turned back to see that my parents were there standing with some of my late uncle's friends that were probably painting themselves like they were close to him to know him very well. The sorrow that I felt immediately turned to anger, and I began to walk towards my parents. I simply did not know what I was going to do, but I knew that I did not want them there. They were not supposed to be there. I approached them, and my mother asked why I never informed them that Uncle Jeff was dead. I responded by saying it's because my late uncle would not want them present at his funeral, and suggested it was best to leave. My mother said I had no right to make such demands, and I was about to create a scene when my attention was needed. It was time to have my uncle cremated. I temporarily ignored my parents and was about to go and attend the only matters when my mother said that my pride would be deflated now that my uncle had died without leaving me anything. I did not reply to her statement or mockery, and my uncle was cremated within minutes, and I thanked everybody for coming. I appealed to the sympathizers to come to the house for some light refreshments. My parents were one of those who showed up, and I was with some guests who were expressing their condolence when my parents walked in through the door. They were surprised because they never expected that my late uncle could build such a home. My parents walked up to me and asked if it was truly the house my uncle had built. I stood up from the sofa where I sat with the guest and looked at my parents and gave an unexpected reply. I told them that my uncle had indeed built the house, but it was now mine. My mother asked if I truly meant what I just said, and I said yes, and even noted Uncle Jeff had left me $500,000 in my account. Their jaws dropped, but while they were still looking for the words to say, I asked them to get their butts out of my home. Everybody was so surprised. Well, my father said that they were still my parents and I could not just disrespect them that way, but I called the security to push them out. I emphasized the pushing part, and I'm just sure Uncle Jeff would be smiling if he could. My parents were shamefully thrown out of the house, and I apologized to the guests for the little chaos. I assured them that it was my uncle would have wanted this. I would be changing my name soon enough, and Toby's currently 17, which means by next year I will attempt to convince him to come live with me, so my parents can spend the rest of their lives alone. Thank you guys for all the support throughout this, and thank you for listening to me.
Well, just being in OP's position, it would be a hard place to be. I mean, just being with the family who's so close-minded that they don't even know what their uncle's up to, and the fact that when the uncle was starting to get sick, OP's dad was like, we don't even care if he's about to die. And the nerve of them to show up to the after-party funeral and the funeral, it was just blowing my mind. Like, you guys haven't even been in this man's life, and you didn't even care if he was sick, and now you're making buddy-buddy with all his friends. It's just disgusting. I want to know your thoughts about it. Maybe if you were in OP's position and you just inherited a house, 500 grand, and countless other assets, and then your family tries to put their nose into it, would you go off on them just like OP did? I have to know your opinion. Drop it in the comment section down below, guys. My name's Mr. Reddito, and if you have not taken a chance to subscribe to the channel and you do enjoy these videos, just know if you subscribe and you hit that little bell notification, YouTube will tell you when I upload another juicy story. Guys, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. And of course, remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.